Boris Johnson has suffered one of the biggest by-election defeats in British political history. His party chairman has resigned, saying it cannot now be business as usual. And many of his own MPs doubt he can win them the next general election. But Boris Johnson himself, well, he is talking about a third term in office, remaining as Prime Minister into the 2030s. It was one of the safest seats the Conservatives have ever lost at a by-election. Tiverton and Honiton has gone, so too has Wakefield, one of the red wall seats turned blue in 2019. After the significant defeats in Yorkshire and Devon, I'll be talking to Boris Johnson's still loyal cabinet colleague, Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis. Is Labour's win in Wakefield big enough to secure victory in a general election? I'll ask the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, how confident he is. Ed Davey will be joining me after a triumph for the Liberal Democrats, but was it any more than a protest vote? And Maureen Lipman tells me about her one-woman play set during the conflicts of the last century and how she first turned it down 3 decades ago.
It has been said that he wrote this with me in mind, and foolishly then, when I was 45, and because of the whole BT thing had made me so Jewish, I didn't want to do it.
And reviewing the papers with me this morning, the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson, and journalist and broadcaster, Helen Lewis. We start, though, with the news from Lakshmi Gopal.
Good morning. Boris Johnson has said he's actively thinking about a third term in Downing Street, despite the Conservatives' 2 by-election defeats on Thursday and the resignation of his party chairman, Oliver Dowden. Speaking to reporters in Rwanda's capital, Kigali, the Prime Minister said he hoped to be in office in the mid-2030s, although Number 10 later suggested the comments were a joke. World leaders from the G7 group of nations will meet in Bavaria today, with the war in Ukraine and the rising cost of living top of the agenda. The leaders gathering in Germany are expected to promise Kyiv more weapons and to impose more sanctions on Moscow. Boris Johnson will warn that any sign of fatigue would play into Russia's hands. The G7 will also promise to do more to tackle the global economic crisis prompted by food shortages and rising fuel prices. The Sunday Times is reporting that Prince Charles accepted €3 million in charity donations from a former Qatari Prime Minister, packed into a suitcase and a Fortnum & Mason carrier bag. Clarence House said the payments were passed on to the Prince's charities, and it had been assured all correct processes were followed. There's no suggestion the payments were illegal. History was made at Glastonbury last night when Sir Paul McCartney became the oldest solo act to headline the festival. Sir Paul, who turned 80 last week, opened his set with the Beatles classic Can't Buy Me Love before bringing on special guests Dave Grohl and Bruce Springsteen. That's all from me. The next news on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Back to you, Sophie.
Lakshmi, thank you very much. Let's look at the front pages of the papers this morning, starting with the Sunday Times and their exclusive story there. Charles accepted €1 million cash in suitcase from a former Qatari Prime Minister, which went to the Prince's Foundation, is their main story. It's been taken as well by the Mail on Sunday. New royal bombshell. Same headline there. Prince faces questions after he also accepted cash stuffed in Fortnum & Mason bags, apparently. The Observer, the PM's plan for a third term is delusional, according to some senior Conservatives, after he said that he was actively looking at a third term. The Sunday Telegraph talks about steel tariffs, the Prime Minister imposing steel tariffs to win back red wall seats in the north of England, and a trade war feared, they say, as Boris Johnson is ready to break the World Trade Organization rules to protect jobs in the north. Lots of pictures as well on the front there of the Sunday Telegraph and other papers of Glastonbury. The Sunday Express leads on the strikes last week. Crackdown on militant unions is their headline, and Boris Johnson being urged not to give an inch to striking rail staff amid fears of a contagion of industrial action that would grind the economy to a halt. And finally, the Sunday Mirror, pretty breaks law in another asylum scandal is their headline. The judge slamming plan to keep housing asylum seekers in dilapidated barracks. Well, with me to review the papers, the Spectator editor Fraser Nelson and the staff writer at The Atlantic. Helen Lewis, good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Let's start, first of all, with the story that is on both the Sunday Times and the Mail on Sunday about Prince Charles. Helen.
So I think Gabriel Progrin is one of the most, annoyingly young and annoyingly talented best young journalists in Britain. And this is another kind of classic Sunday paper scoop. The fact that whatever you think about the legality, this is legal. The Clarence House is saying it was all declared. There is the phrase €1 million in a suitcase that just says to you something is a little bit fishy going on here. There's just a kind of bad smell that comes off it. There's other kind of brilliant details in it too, like the fact that these the €500 notes are nicknamed the Bin Ladens because they were so bound up with terrorist financing. And it's details like that that kind of will make this story stand out in a way that these lobbying stories often don't. It comes again on the heels of another set of stories earlier about a Saudi tycoon financing property renovations for the Prince of Wales. And both of these stories, the Sunday Times, Mail on Sunday, very aggressively going for them. It does speak about the fact that we're going into a new era of royal coverage where there is going to be real scrutiny of particularly the way that Prince Charles has been financing his charity foundations.
Fraser, no suggestion at all of anything illegal, of illegality, but the question is about judgment, really, isn't it?
It is, and for some time now there have been rumours going around about just the methods that Prince Charles has been using to get money for his charities, not breaking the law. But politicians would know far better than to accept a suitcase full of cash. He should be subjected to the same kind of scrutiny because it looks bad. It looks as if somebody thinks that they're buying influence. Otherwise, why would you go about in such a way? What's the matter with a bank transfer? So I think we're going to see more of these stories because the Prince has been, he's quite an avid money raiser for his charities. This has been going on for quite some time. And now it's being looked at with a new lens of scrutiny. This is going to be the monarch perhaps in a few years' time. So let's see how he conducts his affairs and let's see if it stands up to the scrutiny applied to politicians.
And the influence does go the other way too. For example, the redevelopment of the Chelsea barracks, which was a very modernist idea of what redevelopment should look like. Prince Charles is very opposed to that. He believes in kind of traditional architecture. So he wrote to Qatari authorities saying he didn't like it. And lo and behold, it gets scrapped, and then the developers are now embroiled in kind of legal travails about whether or not that really was above board. It is an uncomfortable thing to think of a more political monarch. So one of the great successes of the Queen has been rising above it, and that so far has not been how Prince Charles has acted.
Let's have a look at the scrutiny that the Prime Minister is facing, continues to face, a real contrast in what he has said about actively looking at a third term and what Tory rebels and a lot of unhappy Tory MPs are saying, very much laid out in the papers here.
Yeah. Well, in a way, he was asked a basic question. Do you intend to fight for the next election as leader? If you say yes to that, then you can do the maths and you get to 2030. So what he said wasn't so controversial. But this shows the problems that the Conservatives are in. Obviously, if he stays to fight, he'll be there for the rest of the decade. Do they want that? If so, they've got to change leader now, because why wait until the eve of the next election? If they're going to change leader now, then who do they want? And they don't have an answer to that question. So this shows the problem, not so much for Boris Johnson, but with the Conservative Party in general. They know they don't like him anymore. They don't think he can win. But when you look at the bookmakers' odds for the next leader, we've got Jeremy Hunt, Penny Mordaunt, Liz Truss, Tom Tugendhat, none of these names to most Tories would be so much of an improvement as to make it worthwhile to go through the spectacle of dethroning a sitting Prime Minister. So they're fed up with option A, but they can't yet think of an option B, and they're not sure they want to go from a mess into a void, and that's the risk.
What actually happens now? I mean, what could happen? Is he safe for weeks, for months, for years?
Well, they need to work out if they've got the numbers to depose him properly. There will be a second vote. They'll bend the rules. Technically, he's safe for a year. But they need to work out if he's got more than these. There needs to be probably 100 MPs they need to be sure of.
So you think there definitely will be another vote?
Only when they're 100% sure they can win. Because if it's a second failed attempt, then the resignation will be of Graham Brady, the head of the 22 committee, not of Boris Johnson. If you're going to bend the rules to depose a Prime Minister, you better be sure you can get it right. And because they're not sure what they want to do next, that's what's giving them all pause. We've seen some in the papers today, we've seen some people saying what they want to do next. David Davis is saying, look, I want to basically cut taxes and borrow more. At least that's an alternative. You've got Damian Green complaining about dentists not being open. I think that's a problem. But look at the problems right now. Inflation, strikes, huge public finances, massive debt. You can't see how a new Tory leader is going to get rid of any of these problems. You can see these problems, a lot of them dating back to lockdown, being there to haunt whoever is Conservative leader at that next election, an election which looks like it's going to be won at the moment by Keir Starmer.
And there is a lot of focus on the sort of not just the big picture about Boris Johnson himself, but also things like getting a driving licence, getting a passport, people wanting to get an appointment. That's what David Davis is writing about, isn't it?
Yes,
in the
we've
Telegraph.
reached the helpful backbench advice kind of stage of this premiership, which is always, I think, a worry for any Prime Minister. But you know what? These are people's small interactions with the state. You know, I'm taking my driving test this week. I'm fairly confident that I'm not going to pass because roundabouts still frighten me. But, you know, one of the things that's hanging over my head is the fact that there is currently an average wait after that of 14 weeks. They're trying to get it down to 9 weeks by the end of the year. Many places it's far longer than that. You know, those small interactions, people getting their passports back and the tension of that before summer holidays, you know, those are things that give people the signal that something's just broken. It's just not kind of quite working here with the state. And those are the things that have been coming up on the doorsteps, as much as Fraser says, as the big picture stuff.
And that's what is actually picked up a lot by, in some of these, you've got the Sunday Times there, haven't you? And you do get that sort of, this tension, the stress of people who want things to be fixed, like getting a passport so they can go away on the summer holiday, and wondering what the government's going to do about it.
Well, this is the problem. So many things you get. First of all, it was the truck drivers, not enough of them licensed. All of these government operations that have been closed down over lockdown, massive waiting lists, and now we're trying to get it back. Now there's staff shortages, the airports, etc. All of these things cannot be fixed by a change of personnel in government. This is the price they pay for locking down the economy on and off all the time for the last 2 years. So as the country gets back to normal, or tries to, you basically get the impression of there being chaos in Westminster, chaos in the country, chaos general. Now, the big Tory message at elections is the Labour is the party of chaos, coalition of chaos. We will bring you order. It's going to be almost impossible for them to make that argument this time around.
But Fraser, don't you think there is an issue that is a personality one, which is I have a theory that all Prime Ministers, the thing that people like about them initially is the thing they end up hating about them in the end. So Blair, charismatic, becomes a glib actor. Theresa May, strong and stable, becomes boring. And I think Boris Johnson, the thing people liked him was about the boosterism, the idea of upbeat, you know, this is a country that's going somewhere. And then you see him talking about a third term when 40% of his MPs don't want him there. And it begins, that's the thing, is people will begin to sort of hate him for what they will then see become, boosterism becomes kind of arrogance and complacency.
Yeah, well, he's a revolutionary character, and he was just elected to get Brexit done, to break these logjams, to do all kinds of things at the time seemed impossible. But once he did them, as with all revolutions, the revolutionary himself tends not to be very good at running a government when it comes to be strong and stable, as Theresa May would say. And that's the problem. The job he was elected for, he did very well. But the other job, running a government day to day, is one where he's really failing. And
what a lot of commentators are asking for today is some sort of action now, something to change now. Is it going to be tax cuts? Is it going to be fuel duty cuts?
And there's absolutely no agreement. The deficit of Tory ideas is so depressing. The paper should be full of, I don't know, I mean, say, take Tom Tugendhat, for example, tipped as a potential leader. He should have a manifesto which looks palpably different, a different agenda, some kind of route out of this mess. What we don't see in any newspaper or in any broadcast is any Tories really talking about a palpable route out of the mess.
But Boris Johnson has turned things around before, hasn't he?
He has got a knack of cheating political death. Now, he might be able to do it again. Stranger things have happened. His great strength right now is the weakness of his opponents, internal and external. And if he survives until October, the party conferences, that will be why.
Let's move on to the rail strikes. Lots of coverage, of course, of those this morning. There's an interview in the Mail on Sunday with Andrew Haynes, who's the Network Rail boss. Tell us what he says.
Well, I think he's responding really to the fact that Mick Lynch, the RNT, has had a pretty good week for a trade union boss. He's been absolutely everywhere. He has been, you know, giving a lot of viral interviews with various interviewers who weren't quite ready for him. And so this is really the fight back. And so what Haynes is saying here is essentially, you know, we're trying to modernise. We're trying to do things like use drones to do unsafe tracks. We don't want to send people onto those. So this is the kind of classic battle, really, between unions and bosses about whether or not does modernisation mean you're trying to make our jobs worse, or versus our unions stuck in the mud who don't want to get with the programme. I think it's really interesting. The pollster Peter Kellner wrote about this week, about the fact that initially people tend to like it when governments are tough on unions. However, when it gets months down the line and things aren't fixed, they think it's the government's fault. Why haven't you fixed it? You're the one with the power. So I think for all that, at the moment, I don't think the Tories are worried about picking a fight with the unions. I think in a couple of months' time, if this spreads, they really might be.
Fraser?
Well, I think it's a fascinating interview here because you can see that the arguments are making. Of course, it makes logic. Why would you want to send people onto tracks inspecting them if they can get killed, as one of them was last year? Of course, you'd have said. He says he's got sensors up and down the road, ready to go, ready to be deployed on the rail tracks, but the RMT union won't allow him to do that. Now, when you read that, you think, oh, this is crazy, of course, but the arguments aren't really coming across. People are sympathetic because everybody is facing a real terms pay cut. Everybody would like their pay to go up with inflation, 7%, 10%, perhaps 11%, and everybody thinks that's not going to happen. So in a way, when you see somebody fighting for higher wages, part of you thinks, well, good on you, because somebody needs to win this battle for all workers. So, of course, what the Network Rail are trying to talk about does make sense, but that has been eclipsed by overall inflation. And not just the rail, but the teachers, all sorts of unions now are going to be battling for these big payouts. We're in an economy now where the average private sector pay rise is 8%, the average public sector pay rise is 2%. I think that's a recipe for strikes.
Have you got that there, the PwC story in the Sunday Times business section, where they're getting, I think, 9%, is it? Sort of half the workforce?
Yeah, and we're in a very tight labour market. So what that actually means is that, employers are competing for workers. And I think Fraser is exactly right to say that about the rail strikes. The frame that the bosses would like is very much about modernisation. But if you are a rail boss who is saying we are already accepting essentially a pay cut, and you're asking us to work more weekends and more overtime, and also you're going to pay us less for that. At the same time that pensioners, I think, bringing back the triple lock, so they're protected from inflation. At the same time, you're talking about lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses. It's so the correct way to lobby the government is not industrial action. It's to go to a Tory fundraising ball and, pay 150 grand to have tennis with a minister. I think it's going to be a pretty unpleasant summer.
Talking of summer, let's finish with Glastonbury, because there's lots of coverage of that, of course.
Well, these are pictures that we haven't seen for a couple of years. It was, whether you were there or not, whether you watched it or not, we're now in the spectacle of great summer festivals. This used to be the character of every British summer, and this time, this is a reminder of just how much different and better this summer is to last summer. We can gather, we can go to weddings. People aren't cancelling because they've been pinged by the COVID app. So this is the social thaw of the last 2 years is finally happening, and it's great to see. Even though the headliners are, the longevity of Paul McCartney never ceases to amaze me.
I think it's very funny. You had the Stones performing at Hyde Park. You have Paul McCartney at 80. Brilliant performers who have stood the test of time for a reason. But some of those songs he's playing are now 50, 60 years old. It's like if he was in the Cavern Club being supported in the 1960s by someone playing hits from the 1900s. Yeah. It's just very, very. We have Kate Bush at the top of the charts with something that's nostalgia has come back. Top Gun in the cinemas, a reboot. I think it's great for people my age and above who can relive our misspent youths. But I do feel a bit sorry sometimes for young people who spent a lot of time cooped up and now don't even have youth culture to themselves.
I'm always struck by the amount of music that I used to listen to in my 20s and my teenagers now listen to now.
But they can do that now because they've got Spotify that allows you to have a back catalogue. Yeah. Back in the 80s, unless you had the album in your cupboard, you weren't going to listen to the old music. But now young people can. And it's funny that perhaps like the classical music, McCartney's going to be listened to for centuries to come. Who knows?
Well, thank you both very much for joining me. Helen, Fraser, thank you. Let's have a look at the weather now with Darren Bett peering out the window here. It's the sort of blue sky, cloudy. Well, it's just what you have too there, Darren.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Sophie. Good morning. We've got the best of the dry weather and the sunshine today across more eastern parts of England, and though I suspect many farmers and growers are hoping for a bit of rain. That wetter weather is much further west. It's been getting very much wetter in the southwest of Scotland over the past few hours. We have low pressure sitting very close to Northern Ireland. It was a very wet start here, but you can see how the rain is pushing through the Irish Sea where it's very windy. Wetter weather in the southwest of Scotland continuing northwards and eastwards across Scotland. Some showers already across parts of England and Wales. Most of those will be across the western areas, more in the way of sunshine further east. But after the rain in Northern Ireland, some heavy showers are going to be following in here, and it's going to feel quite cool. Highest temperatures where we've got the best of the sunshine for eastern areas of England, 22, maybe even 23 degrees. But it will be windy for all of us. The winds do ease down overnight tonight. We've got this band of showery rain pushing into Wales, western parts of England. A few showers following to Northern Ireland and western Scotland, but clearer skies in eastern England after the sunshine. sunshine. Temperatures typically 11 or 12 degrees. Some early sunshine for eastern England, but there is some rain in the forecast here. This band of showers will push into eastern areas through the day. Some sunshine following on behind. It will cloud over, though, later on in Northern Ireland. Signs of more rain to come for Tuesday. Ahead of that, though, temperatures a little on the cool side for this time of year, typically around 16 to 21 Celsius. Sophie.
Darren, thank you very much. Now, at the last general election, they came third in Tiverton and Honiton. In Thursday's by-election, the Liberal Democrats leapfrogged Labour to win the seat, overturning a Conservative majority of more than 24,000. How did they do it? I'm joined now by the Liberal Democrat leader, Ed Davey. Good morning. So a huge majority that you took there in Tiverton and Honiton. Was it tactical voting or just something else?
I think it was something else. I think people were very upset about our Prime Minister and they wanted to send a clear message to Conservative MPs that Boris Johnson has got to go. But there was also a really positive vote for the Liberal Democrats and our candidate Richard Ford, who lived locally. He'd served in the British Army as an officer for 10 years. I think a lot of people liked what he was saying. They liked what the Liberal Democrats are saying. Our proposal for a VAT cut to give the average household £600 to cut inflation. People liked that. And I think so there was a really positive vote for the Liberal Democrats there.
Because you really did leapfrog Labour, didn't you? I mean, you came third in the last general election. You lost badly. You lost your deposit in Wakefield this time round. How do you explain that?
Well, I think in Tiverton and Honiton, as I said, it was a very positive vote for us. There was also a message to Tory MPs. But what was really clear in Tiverton and Honiton, it wasn't so much Labour voters voting for us, though we're obviously grateful that they did. It was switching Conservatives. We would never have won that seat if we hadn't persuaded a lot of former Conservative voters to vote Liberal Democrat. And so what was interesting, and Conservatives don't want to admit this, they want to blame it all on tactical voting. The reality is we couldn't have won that seat, impossible to have won that seat, if we hadn't persuaded a lot of former Conservatives to vote for us, and they did in their droves. And that should be really worrying Conservative MPs, and it's one of the reasons why I think Liberal Democrats can do well at the next election. There are a lot of lifelong Conservatives who are looking at the Liberal Democrats, like our plan on the tax cut, on a whole range of issues, and they are switching to us. And that is why I think Tiverton and Honiton isn't just a one-off. And of course, we've had 3 by-election victories in the last 12 months. We've had a great set of local elections. And that actually tells a story of the Liberal Democrats being the ones to take seats off the Conservatives.
But your vote collapsed in Wakefield and Labour's vote collapsed in Devon. Is there some sort of deal with Labour,
No.
Informal or... No, nothing, no formal, nothing informal?
Not at all, because if you look at the seats we need to win at the next election, that we can win the next election, we've got to persuade a lot of former Conservatives to vote for us. And that's what we're doing very, very successfully. Now, the truth is, it's our responsibility to beat as many Conservative MPs at the next election. We've got to get rid of this Conservative government. They don't have a plan for our country. They're failing our country. We need a change of direction. And I think you're seeing the voters work out for themselves who to get behind if they want to punish Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. That's happened in the past. I think it's happening increasingly so, and that's certainly what we saw in Tiverton and Honiton. And before that, Chesham and Amersham, when we won a year ago in True Blue Buckinghamshire, beat the Conservatives there, and North Shropshire just before Christmas, where we beat the Conservatives in a seat they'd held for 200 years. So voters can figure this out for themselves, and I think it's quite a relief for many people that they can beat the Conservatives and send a message that Boris Johnson must go. It
was a by-election, and obviously the next election will be a general election. Do you think the people of Tiverton and Honiton, who overwhelmingly voted Leave, didn't they, in the EU referendum, do you think that they realise that your party wants to take the UK back into the EU single market? Well,
we're actually focusing in on the trade deal, and the trade deal is really bad for people in Tiverton and Honiton. The farmers were telling us that. They feel betrayed by the government's policy. Everyone knows we're pro-European, and we've never hid that.
And of course we haven't. To take the UK back into the EU single market?
At the moment, we want to focus on the issues that are affecting people, and the cost of living crisis is partly caused because of the very bad trade deal, it's hit farmers, it's hit fishermen, it's hit small businesses, it's hit exporters, it's driving up costs. And we do need to have a much better trade deal with our European neighbours, and we also need to have an economic plan. And this is the problem I have with the Conservatives. They don't have an economic plan. Boris Johnson is completely incoherent in his economic strategy.
I want to talk about your party's policy, though, and I'm just asking specifically about that, the EU single market. Do you want to take the UK back into that?
We're not talking about that now.
But you talked about that at your spring conference. Is that where you want to go?
Well, we believe that if you're going to improve our economy, if you're going to get Britain moving again, you need a plan. And that plan
is that the EU?
Well, I think the EU doesn't want to talk to Britain at the moment because I'm afraid the relationship between Britain and Europe has been so bad, it's been poisoned by Boris Johnson. And that's not helpful to businesses, it's not helpful to workers. Our economy is in a mess. Unless we can get on with our neighbours and our friends and our allies, we're never going to improve our economy. So that's why I come back to this central point. We need a plan.
And is that plan, I still don't understand, is that plan still for you? Is your policy still to go back into the EU single market as the Liberal Democrats? Because that's what you will be campaigning on in the next general election, if it is.
Before you can even think of that, you need to improve our relations with Europe. Before you even think of that...
So you don't know, or you haven't decided?
Because actually it's a staged approach that you have to take. If you were coming in, you first of all have to make sure you can get around the table and have a proper discussion, because the Europeans don't trust Britain anymore because of Boris Johnson. Secondly, they want to negotiate on the trade deal, and the trade deal's put up so many barriers. It's raised costs, it's raised prices, and so that would be the first thing you would have to tackle, and you'd have to tackle that with a plan for the wider economy, and that's what Liberal Democrats have got. And you know, the economy is stagnating at the moment.
But going back into the EU single market obviously also entails free movement of people. Do you support that?
Well, I've said that before, but the real issue, if you look at businesses and staff, is they can't find the staff. We have shortage of staff in our health service, in our care services, in almost every employer that I talk to, every business I talk to can't find the staff. So we need a strategy which is going to help get the staff, and that will particularly include training and reskilling people. We don't have the skills that we need in our country, and there's lots of people who would like to upskill, and Liberal Democrats have policies on that.
And is that what you will be campaigning for in the next general election, going back into the EU single market and free movement of people?
Well, I'm not going to write the manifesto now, Sophie. I'm sorry. I want to focus on the issues that are facing people now. And the thing we campaigned on in our historic by-election victory in Tiverton-Honiton was a tax cut on VAT. The reason is that addresses the problems people are facing now. When we won the by-election in Chesham and Amersham, we had campaigned against the Conservative plan to give developers more power to build houses for the wealthy, not the houses that people need. We've got to change of policy. I want the government to change policy and deliver a tax cut for people who are struggling now.
Ed Davey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, later this summer, Dame Maureen Lipman will be back on stage in a one-woman play about a survivor of the horrors of 1930s and 1940s Europe who makes a new life in America. Rose sees the eponymous heroine travel from Ukraine to wartime Poland, then to Palestine and eventually the USA. It's very moving, but it's also infused with vibrant humour and has plenty to say about contemporary issues such as refugees, war in Europe and migration.
I took a job ordering food for the Majestic Hotel. And soon I was running the kitchen, and soon I was managing the place. The guests were intrigued by me because of the exodus. That gave me cachet. It spelled adventure, unlike the death camps, which were too dark and too threatening to be even thought about. A boat they could deal with, but I didn't tell them about anything else. She's very clever and she's funny. I love her to pieces. It's an honour to have this Martin Sherman text. And he says to me, you know, it has been said that he wrote this with me in mind. And foolishly then, when I was 45, and because of the whole BT thing had made me so Jewish, I didn't want to do it.
Melvin, I'm with Dolly.
And perhaps that was a good thing because, you know, I'm not far from the age. She says, I'm 80 years old. I find that unforgivable.
But you say foolishly. You think you should have done it at the time?
Oh, I think you should always do a great piece of work of art if you're offered it. But I mean, I think in retrospect it was right. I'm ready. I have to be strong. I have to run like you, Sophie, and every night is going to be a marathon, and I'm frightened to death. I've never done it to an audience. I've only ever done it on my own.
It's fantastic to watch, and it is quite simply you on your own. It's a monologue. She starts in Ukraine. She ends up in America. She is there, 80 years old, looking back on her life, and she says, I'm not sure if my memory is of an event or a scene from Fiddler on the Roof.
She says, in my mind, I see, she's talking about the Cossacks. They had big hats, big horses, big whips, beautiful faces. She says, but I don't know whether I'm remembering that or, you know, as you said, a scene from Fiddler. In my mind, I see chorus boys on horseback. and I think that is true, particularly with the kind of memory that I have, which is, you know, people are always saying to me, oh, you did this and you came along, and do you remember when you, and I'm going, yeah, it's great, wasn't it? No idea what happened. I stopped dressing like a demented gypsy. My suddenly tasteful wardrobe stood out from the clashing colours of the majestic clientele, and they knew I didn't quite belong. And it's about refugees. It's about taking seriously the plight of the refugee and not making them into criminals. Could it be more relevant? It's about the Ukraine.
And Rose herself is quite critical of Israel, isn't she? The policy that they take. She talks about the empathy, having been, you know, a refugee and somebody who was persecuted. She talks about a lack of empathy for the Palestinians.
The play turns on that axis. And Martin, the author, and I would disagree about that. But that's the point of drama. And I'm anxious not to make this into a Jewish play. It really is a play about compassion. He would take the point of view that she sees Israel now as the aggressor. So yes, it poses questions where sometimes the actress doesn't agree with the author. It doesn't matter. We're out there together on this quest to make people understand and think and feel. It's, you know, and I have to keep it very restrained as well because it's very touching.
It's very low key, isn't it, in your performances, but wonderfully moving at the same time. Let's talk about Evelyn Plummer, a rather different character who's described as a battle axe, a nuisance, a monster, unpleasant and mean.
Well, I'm sure they're going to be the best of friends.
I don't know about that. This one thinks your dog looks like food.
Well, tell him not to think like that.
Right. Cerberus, impulse control. Don't eat cocoa.
Is there anything good about it?
Not a stretch. Anything good about it? Well, they do keep giving her a softness. She's bright. She's hard, but she'll be there backing you up, I think. But there is an attempt always to soften her up, and I don't think one should, because I don't think people change.
Well, Dame Maureen Lipman, good luck with Rose. And it's absolutely wonderful. I've watched it on the screens, so I look forward to seeing it in the theatre. And what a project, and I hope it goes really well for you.
That's very nice of you. Thank you very much.
Now, Wakefield is a seat Labour had held since before the Second World War until the Conservatives took it off them at the 2019 general election. Labour won the seat back on Thursday, but was the scale of the party's victory there big enough to suggest the party is on the path to power at the next general election? The Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, joins me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
You called it a thumping victory in Wakefield. It certainly was a victory, but it was a, 12.7% swing there compared to what the Liberal Democrats achieved in Devon. That was a 30% swing. Thumping victory?
I don't think you can make comparisons like that. Completely different seats. 12.7% swing from the Conservatives to Labour. If that was replicated across the country, we would be forming the next government, and I would be Foreign Secretary and Keir Starmer would be Prime Minister. That's what the result tells us, and it builds on the good results that we had in the local elections. When I was knocking on doors in Wakefield, and let me say I was in West Yorkshire last time round in the general election result, people were saying that they were going to vote Conservative. They had a very heavy heart, but they didn't feel able to put an X by Labour's name. That had transformed in this by-election in just 2.5 years. Why? Because they had lost faith, confidence, trust in Boris Johnson. They thought he lacked integrity, and they didn't think that Boris Johnson was waking up every morning thinking about their concerns, their cost of living concerns, their costs with their kids' education, the queues that they were waiting for in the NHS with their GP, and all the rest of it. That's why Labour was both the party of change and the party that is persuading Conservatives to vote Labour. We cannot form a government if there aren't people in the country who would vote Conservative but are choosing to vote Labour. That's what we saw in Wakefield.
What happened in Devon then? Because your vote completely collapsed. You lost your deposit.
Well, in Devon, the Conservatives lost by a staggering amount, and there would have been Labour voters there that made the decision that they would lend their vote to the Liberal Democrats because they wanted to see the back of Boris Johnson. Look, right across the country, north and south, people are switching away from the Conservatives. Let's be clear. Tiverton is a seat that Labour has never held. He didn't hold it in this century, didn't hold it in the last century. That's not a seat we would expect to win. The Tories lost it. They lost it by a great amount. They lost Wakefield as well.
But you were second in the general election in Tiverton and Honiton, and yet your vote completely collapsed in this by-election.
I don't think collapsed is the right way to put it.
Well, you lost your deposit.
And the Liberal Democrats lost their deposits in Wakefield. The truth is, people look at the Conservatives, they don't want to put their vote by the Conservatives, and they're going to go for the party that's in the best position to beat them. In Wakefield, it was us. In Tiverton, it was the Liberal Democrats.
Ed Miliband had 6 by-elections, didn't he, with a swing of more than 10% to Labour. He went on to lose. What happened in Wakefield? Does that really say that you are actually on track for government?
I don't want to be complacent. Of course there's more to do. But I do want to emphasise, 2.5 years ago, people were writing the Labour Party off. They said it would be a decade out of power. In a very short space of time, Keir Starmer has turned this Labour Party around. It's now the party of change in this country. It's now a party where Conservatives are choosing to put an X by Labour. That is a fantastic turn of events. We go on. Of course, we need to continue to set out our vision, our policies as we head towards the next general election, a manifesto. But we are in very, very good shape given the situation we were in 2019.
Was there any pact with the Lib Dems at all, unofficial, official?
No pact with the Liberal Democrats. We fight for every single seat. I've got to say, my sense is that the British people do not want politicians to stitch up who wins an election in formal pacts. They want the choice. They want to be able to look at the policies, look at the parties and make that choice themselves. There will be no pacts with any political party before the next general election.
Even the SNP? Would you not
there
consider...
There will be no pacts with the SNP. There will be no pacts with the Liberal Democrats. There will be no pacts with the Greens.
Well, you look at what happened in Devon and you do wonder about the Labour vote then. Wouldn't it be sensible for you to have some sort of pact?
Actually, Sophie, I don't think it would, because what you saw is that the electorate is able to make their own judgment. They don't need politicians to fix it for them, so we don't need a pact.
Let's talk about strikes. The RMT strikes last week. 50 MPs went against the wishes of the party leader and joined the RMT picket lines last week. What is going to happen to them? What will the repercussions be?
Well, I suspect the Chief Whip will be speaking to them next week and making it very clear that a serious party of government does not join picket lines. It's likely that there will continue to be disputes over the coming weeks and months. We're in a cost of living crisis, and people will no doubt be concerned about rising inflation and where their salaries are as a result of that. A serious party of government in government is in the business of negotiation, sitting down with both those who are striking and management who make these working conditions. And so, look, I don't think it's helpful to stand on picket lines.
And yet 50 MPs, Labour MPs, went against Keir Starmer and the leadership's wishes. Has he lost control of his own MPs?
Keir Starmer has not lost control of his own MPs. We've just seen that the parties that have lost control are parties that lose votes. And I think that's the Conservatives and the Prime Minister who's lost his backbenchers. The Labour Party is in a strong position with strong leadership and a clear direction of travel. I haven't seen the numbers, and I've seen that there's some photos that have been put out that are actually previous strikes, not the current strike. So I don't know if the number is in fact 50, but there's no suggestion at all of dispute within the party.
But if they didn't defy him, or if he hasn't lost control, yet they did defy him, and do we just need to accept that the Labour Party is still deeply divided?
The Labour Party is not divided. Look, let's be clear. The name is Labour, and it's Labour for a reason. It's Labour because we historically want to associate ourselves with working people wherever they are across the country. And let's take these rail strikes. Working people find it very hard when they can't get to work to make a living. But equally, there are working people who work on the railways who are seeing their pay diminished and have concerns about redundancies at this time. The way to deal with that is through negotiation, getting around the table. The government is currently stoking it, refusing to lead. They're delighted to have a battle with the unions and to hark back to the 1970s. They're not actually getting on with the serious business of government.
The name is Labour, as you just said. The RMT leader, Mick Lynch, said this week that the Labour Party should be on the side of the working people and shouldn't be uncomfortable supporting the unions and their actions. Do you agree?
Well, the RMT isn't an affiliated union with the Labour Party. It's important to stress that. I think it's also important to say that we've got to support working people wherever they are in the country, and that is obviously beyond RMT union members. There are working people who use the trains to get to work. There are working people who are not in unionised industries and businesses. So we support all working people, all of them feeling the pinch at this time because of this government who's got no plan on the economy, no plan to deal with cost of living, no plan to deal with inflation, no plan on crime, no plan on hospitals, no plan on education.
So what about GMB and Unite workers who are the unions representing the BA check-in staff, the ones who say they're going to go on strike, who balloted for strike this summer, who could ruin a lot of people's summer holidays? They're balloting for strike because of a 10% pay cut that was imposed on them during the pandemic. They want it reversed. Do you support them? Will you stand with them?
Well, look, all of us are feeling the pinch with inflation. Many of us might want a rise of 10%. In truth, most people understand it's unlikely that you're going to get that. It's a negotiation, and it would not be right, it would not be responsible opposition if I suggested yes to every strike, you should get your... No one would think...
So do you support them or not?
No, I don't. No, I don't. It is a no. It's a categorical no.
Why?
Because I'm serious about the business of being in government, and the business of being in government is that you support negotiation. Now, every single dispute will be different. Most of them are not just on salary. Many are on conditions. Many are on modernisation. Some are on pensions. So it would be slightly binary to suggest it was solely about salary. But responsible government negotiates. This government is in the driving seat. This government isn't negotiating. This government is not supporting...
Well, this particular strike is British Airways, obviously, isn't it?
Yeah, but look at what's happening in Britain. We've got queues in all our airports, both on the security side and both waiting for your luggage. You can't get a passport. You can't get a driving licence. The country's in a standstill. It's not Labour Party in the driving seat, it's the Conservatives in the driving seat. They're running the country, and they're running it very badly. We're now in backlog Britain,
Let me ask you about the story on the front of the Sunday Telegraph today, which is about steel tariffs, and the Prime Minister reportedly considering imposing tariffs on imported steel to protect jobs in the British steel industry in the north of England. Would you back him doing that?
Yes, well, look...
Even if it broke international law?
I think it's the extension that he is suggesting. It's an extension that both the European Union and the Americans have continued with. So we would support him. Steel workers support him, the union support him, industry support him, and Labour does support him.
What about leadership? Let me just quickly ask you about that, because we were talking last week about Keir Starmer apparently telling some of his colleagues to prepare for some sort of succession. Would you, if that were the case, throw your hat in the ring?
Let me be absolutely absolutely clear. I co-chaired Keir Starmer's campaign. He is going to be the next Prime Minister.
We don't know what Durham Police have to say yet.
He continues to lead this party, and I'm totally against any suggestion that we should be sort of preparing for some sort of succession. It's ridiculous. The Labour Party's in the strongest position we've been in for many, many years. Don't break what is working.
David Lammy, thank you very much. Now, to lose one by-election may be regarded as a misfortune. To lose two on the same looks perhaps like carelessness, and it was the sheer scale of the defeat in Tiverton and Honiton in particular that spooked many Conservatives, amongst them the party chairman Oliver Dowden, who immediately resigned, noting pointedly his continued loyalty to the Conservative Party without so much as a mention of the Prime Minister. One man who is still loyal to Boris Johnson is the Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis, and he is with me now. Good morning.
Good morning.
The Prime Minister, is he serious when he says that he's actively thinking about a third term as Prime Minister?
Yes, but I think let's be clear about what he's saying. And I think, look, we often as politicians, particularly when you're in government, get criticised for making decisions looking at the next week, the next election, the next year, and not looking long term. What I think is really good with this Prime Minister, and I see this every day, is his enthusiasm and drive to deliver for our country, and actually looking in the longer term about the structural changes we want to see, improving our economy, growing more high productivity jobs. To be looking long term at that is a really good thing.
You've just suffered one of the worst by-election defeats in British political history in Tiverton. You've lost Wakefield as well. The party chairman, Oliver Dowden, has resigned. Was he to blame for it all?
Look, we all have responsibility for elections, both national elections, local elections and by-elections. I was in Wakefield myself on Thursday as well. We've all got responsibility for that, and that's about actually getting on with focusing on the job to deliver. So by the time we get to the general election, indeed next year's local elections as well, that we're giving people a positive reason to vote for us. We know by-elections are not things you can extrapolate into a general election. We've seen consistently over the years where by-elections go one way, a general election goes another way. Our job is to motivate all those people who have voted Conservative before, who didn't turn out and vote at all on Thursday, that at the next election there is a good positive reason to vote for us.
And you watched what happened in those two by-elections. You watched particularly what happened in Tiverton and Honiton, one of the safest seats you've ever lost in a by-election, and you thought Boris Johnson is still the man to win the next election.
Well, look, there's no getting away from the fact that Thursday's results were not good results. They're bad results for us. We've got to be clear about that. We've also got to look at the facts on the ground. You know, we saw an increase in the Liberal Democrat vote of a couple of percent. What we saw was a lot of people stayed home and didn't vote. Same in Wakefield, as it happens. So for us, it's got to be around making sure that at the next general election, we're giving people a positive reason to vote for us. When you talk about the Prime Minister, this, of course, is somebody, and I might have even said this to you before, Sophie, who, in the run-up to when he ran for London Mayor in 2012, was told he couldn't win. We certainly had that in 2019 and then got an overwhelming mandate. So, yes, I do think Boris Johnson is, as I've said before, the person who will lead us successfully through the next general election.
That's not what Michael Howard, your former party leader, says. He says that not only with the Conservative Party, but the country will be better off under a new leadership.
Well, look, I disagree, and with all great respect to Michael Howard, who sadly wasn't able to win an election when he led our party, I think we have got somebody who has a proven record of winning elections, both as London Mayor, but also as Prime Minister in 2019. We have come through a really difficult period. Both these by-elections have come off the back of a really difficult period, both why both of those elections were called in themselves, but also a backdrop where people are dealing with some really challenging circumstances. So there's no getting away from it. It was a difficult week for us last week, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be getting on with and focusing on the positive things we are looking to do for the country. And that's where the Prime Minister's focus is. I have to say, working with him, whether it's for Northern Ireland or more generally across the UK as a member of the Cabinet, that's what I see his focus on every single day.
So people shouldn't listen to Michael Howard, a former party leader, what he had to say. And he'd said he'd thought about it very long and hard, and he'd really considered whether it was the right time to say it.
Well, I disagree with him. One of the benefits of the Conservative Party, actually, one of the strengths of our party, and I'd say as somebody who's been chairman of it for a fair while, is that we have got a very, very big, wide tent. We have people with all different views across our party. Ultimately, when we come together, that's what makes us stronger, because we have these different views that we need to take account of to deliver what is ultimately the policies that can take our country forward. And I think we've got that being led by the right person, and Boris Johnson.
It's a very different picture that you're painting to the one that Oliver Dowden has been painting, your former party chairman, who said that your supporters are distressed and disappointed by recent events. If supporters are distressed and disappointed by recent events, and it should not be business as usual, as Oliver Dowden said, that's going to be a problem for you as you go out and campaign in the next election.
Well, as I say, over the last few months, not least of all the reasons why these two by-elections came about, have been a very, very difficult period. It's a difficult period for us as a country, and it's certainly been a difficult period for us as a party. I'm not shying away from that. We need to be we need to accept that and acknowledge that. That's why it's right that we redouble our efforts to focus on building and delivering a country that's growing, an economy that's growing, that's delivering for people money in their pockets, jobs and job security in the future, but also as a party giving our volunteers, who I go out with most weekends, the motivation to go out and to vote. And I think we will see the benefits of that, both in next year's wider local elections across the country, but ultimately in the general election when it comes.
Are you worried about your own majority? It's smaller than the majority in Tiverton and Hunton.
No, I focus on working for my constituents. I don't think you can extrapolate, as I say, from a local election into a general election. That's been proven time and again to just be a false calculation. I will be focused in my constituency about continuing to deliver for my constituents. We've seen huge investments in Great Yarmouth with a third river crossing, which is physically being built at the moment, improvements and money for our college, for our council, for our railways, £96 billion going into railway infrastructure across the country. And my constituency's benefited from all of those investments, for flood protection investments, money for the local authority, money to support people through COVID. And I hope that we will have the policies, I'm confident we'll have the policies that will encourage my electorate to come and vote for the Conservative Party at the next election.
The Prime Minister
as well.
has said on the BBC yesterday, there's no psychological transformation that he's going to undergo. That is not going to happen. How do you convince the public, your own colleagues, who are very worried about their own positions, their own jobs, even if you're not, how do you convince them to support him?
But look, because I think we've got somebody who's promised. First of all, we've had a democratic vote on this, both the mandate that the membership gave Boris Johnson when he ran for leader, which was overwhelming, the mandate in 2019.
Yes, but I mean 40% of his MPs have voted for him to say they hadn't got confidence.
We're also all Democrats, but we're also all Democrats, and we come together now and we focus as a party on delivering for people. We've got big jobs to do, not just obviously continuing the work to recover the country as we've come out of COVID and the problems that COVID has left us and the backlog of challenges we've got there, particularly the work that Sajid Javid is doing in the health service, but also with the global pressures on inflation and the work that Rishi Sunak as Chancellor is doing to make sure that we can support people through that period as best we can, with £37 billion already being put into supporting people. These are all big things we need to do domestically, as well as the work that the Prime Minister is rightly doing on the world stage to defend and protect democracy with Putin's invasion on the Ukraine.
And that is the point that David Davis, your colleague, is making in the Sunday Telegraph today. And he says that the party needs to stop talking about what you're going to do to help people, and actually do it. He says you need to stop talking about tax reductions and deliver them. When are you going to do that?
Well, people are going to see a tax reduction next month, actually. The change in national insurance means that most people are going to see a several £100 tax reduction next month. They're going to see further support, part of that £37 billion package in the autumn that's going to come through. So that is happening. A big chunk of that £37 billion is already in the system with the duty cuts that the Chancellor's brought in. So we are getting on with these things, and even just tomorrow we'll be starting the process of the legislation to fix the issues of the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we are getting on with the job and delivering today as well.
Delivering things that will help people now who are struggling with the rising cost of living. You're still the highest taxing Tory government in history. What are you going to do to help people now?
Well, there's two things. First of all, as we've come out of COVID, that unprecedented right support that we put in place through COVID obviously has meant that we've now got to make those tough decisions around balancing the economy for the future. It's not just about the Chancellor's decisions. It's got to be not just about how we help people today, but the impact that has in the medium and the long term. But he has put in place a £37 billion support package that's putting more money in people's pockets. Over 8 million people, a third of the most vulnerable people in the population, will see a £1,200 per household benefit through that package. So this is actual money that's going to help people today and tomorrow. And as I say, the tax benefit people will see from national insurance threshold change comes in July.
But what about fuel duty, for example? That is what people are really feeling at the moment as prices at the pump keep rising. 5p has already been cut. Why not cut it further?
Well, again, this is two things like that. First of all, the Business Secretary has asked the Markets Authority to look into making sure that the money that the Chancellor is putting does get directly to people at the pumps, to the consumer, which is where it should be. We've got to let them do that quick review as well, because that's important in terms of the decisions the Chancellor has to make.
But people need that help now,
yeah,
don't they?
They do. We've got to make sure that it's actually getting to them, and that's why it's right that the Chancellor takes that balanced approach to look at these difficult decisions around making sure that we're getting money to people so we can have money in their pocket. Look, as a Conservative, I believe in a low-tax economy. I want to see that both for businesses to grow and for individuals to have more control over their own money.
You're a long way off that, though. I mean, the 5p cut in duty, the Treasury is getting an awful lot more money since that cut was imposed because the prices are rising so fast. You could go further. You could do 10p, for example.
Well, we've got to make sure that whatever we do is getting to consumers. That's why this review that they've asked the authority to do is important, and it will feed into the work that the Chancellor is doing to make sure that we are putting in place the right policies, the right reductions where we can for people, but also taking the balance. So this is all taxpayers' money. So we've got to make sure that what we do now isn't creating a bigger pressure on inflation that we're seeing globally, or creating structural problems in the medium and long term.
What about a VAT cut on household energy bills?
Well, these are all the kind of things that the Chancellor is looking at. What can we do?
But you keep saying looking at.
Well, because
people want
we've
the help
already.
now.
Well, two things. First of all, we have already taken some action on these areas. Actually, one of the reasons we're taking the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill through is the decisions the Chancellor's already taken on that side of VAT. People in Northern Ireland can't benefit from because the EU's requirements under the protocol. We've got to fix that as well. But what the Chancellor's looking at in terms of what more can we do on top of what is an unprecedented, £37 billion of support for people is a huge package. That's from taxpayer money. So we've got to make sure that we're doing this in a way that not just delivers for people, but doesn't cause other problems down the line, either with inflation or with growing debt that, of course, a future generation will have to pay.
Can I ask you about steel tariffs? Are you contemplating imposing tariffs, which may be illegal under international law, on imports of steel, just to protect our own steel industry?
Well, we always work and are focused on ensuring we work within international law. The Business Secretary and the Prime Minister are looking at all of these things, getting the balance right. And as you just heard with David Lammy, this is something that is supported across the sector. It's looking at getting the balance right about how we trade with our international partners, but also supporting jobs and sectors here in the UK, as we're looking to do across energy security, food security, and indeed infrastructure security, which steel feeds into as well.
So even if that threatens a trade war of some sort or retaliation of some sort, it is worth doing?
Well, I'm not saying that we're going to do this. The Chancellor and the Business Secretary and the Prime Minister have got to look at all of these things. They've got to get the balance around what we do and how we trade internationally with people, as well as protecting and delivering on a sector of the economy here that is important for jobs. And I think it is right that they're looking at all of these things to be able to make the right decisions, to protect jobs here, to see our economy grow, and to make sure we've got the input for steel, for example, that we need to grow our infrastructure in the future, which is so important to our future economy.
So are you a party, the Conservatives, of free trade or of protectionism?
Oh, we're a party of free trade. We always have been. That's why, as I say, we've got to make sure, and we will be looking at how all of these decisions we make domestically, how they work with and get the balance right with how we trade globally as well. It's also why it is important, again, why we fix the issues of the Northern Ireland Protocol, because that's having an impact in how business trades across the United Kingdom and how United Kingdom businesses can trade globally as well.
And another big story on the front pages of the papers this morning is about Prince Charles, who's reported to have accepted vast sums of cash from the former Prime Minister of Qatar. Should he have done that?
Well, look, this isn't a government issue, but what I have seen is the palace have been very clear that all of these, all monies go through proper due process. The charities obviously go through proper due process. I'm confident, having had some dealings with charities, the Prince's Trust, Prince's Foundation around the palace in the past myself, that these will have gone through proper due process. Obviously, they're looking at this. As I say, again, I saw from the palace's statement, they had a very limited time from being told about this story to be able to feed back on it, but they're looking into this. It's something from 10 years ago, but they're very clear these went through due process, as they should do, as all charitable donations do.
Do you think, though, I mean, it is about the optics, really, isn't it? This is the heir to the throne we're talking about. It's about judgment. Do you think it does put in question his judgment?
But I don't think it's appropriate for a government minister to be commenting on issues around the palace. I've seen the statement the palace have put out. I absolutely think that's the right statement to put out. It's very clear these things go through due process. I think it is. We do see that we have got, through the Commonwealth, through the role that our head of state, Her Majesty and the royal family play internationally, that we do see international interest and support for charities that we support here in the UK and that the royal family support. That's not unusual. As long as these things go through proper due process, I think that's fine.
Would you accept cash like that from a foreign leader?
I've never had cash from a foreign leader, but again, any donation that comes in, whether it's a political donation, a charitable donation, as long as it's goes by the law and it goes through proper due process, I think that's fine.
Brandon Lewis, thank you very much for joining us this morning. And that's it from us for today. I will be back at the same time next week. See you then. Goodbye.